Reluctant Preppers provides educational awareness and commentary only. Opinions expressed do not constitute personalized financial advice. Viewers are encouraged to do their own research and seek qualified personal financial consultation before making investment decisions. Does your family ever get exasperated with you for stockpiling such things as paper towels, bottled water, or toilet tissue? Well, they certainly can't object to you stockpiling money. Silver, the only money recognized by the U.S. Constitution, and your first 10-ounce bar of pure silver can be had at spot price with no premium by going to sdbullion.com/rp. And when you buy it that way, you'll be supporting Reluctant Preppers as well by going to sdbullion.com/rp. Thanks. This is a quick update to thank you for building our number of patrons to 76 and growing on patreon.com/reluctantpreppers. Soon, when we reach 100 active patrons, we're going to start sending out a 1-ounce U.S. Silver Eagle each and every month to one active subscriber, so you don't want to miss out on that.
Please help us grow by subscribing today at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We're privileged to have this returning guest, extremely popular with our viewers. We have Rob Kerby, the founder of KirbyAnalytics.com. Rob is a commentator and a proprietary analyst on the gold and silver markets and how they're affected by and how they affect the other equity markets and the debt market in particular. He's got a long and deep background in the financial arena, and he's here with us again on Reluctant Preppers, both to deal with some current issues and to answer your viewer questions. Rob, thank you for joining us once again.
Pleasure to be with you again, Dunnigan.
Today is Tuesday, October 9th, 2018. Before we get into some viewer questions, and we've got a raft of them tonight, we've been seeing quite a bit of volatility and some turning of the tide in the bond yield and the bond markets and the equity markets showing some signs of indecision. Others are saying that we may be near a tipping point. Can you talk to us about your outlook on the equities and debt markets?
Very short term, I have never been as bearish as I am right now on the equity and the bond market. And my rationale for adopting this very, very short-term bearish view is that I believe interest rates, which arguably should be higher anyway, but have been held at unnaturally low rates for a very long time. I believe that they're being engineered higher very swiftly to provide a backdrop for a massacre in the equity markets. And I think this is all going to be brought to us by the deep state, because the deep state controls the financial apparatus. And what's behind this deep state move, I believe they are trying to create a short-term disaster in the equity markets, because Trump has taken ownership of the equity markets. They lost on their hair on fire attempt to deny Trump's pick for the Supreme Court, with Kavanaugh being confirmed this past weekend. And to be completely honest with you, I don't think the resistance to Kavanaugh had anything to do with the man himself. Mm-hmm. And I think it had everything to do with delaying and hoping and praying that the Democrats could take back the House, possibly, and or the Senate. And if the Democrats are able to pull off that feat, and if they were able to deny Kavanaugh's affirmation to the Supreme Court, I do believe that a newly formed House and Senate, if the Democrats happen to be back in the majority in both levels of House and Senate, I think they would then be stonewalling that Trump has no right to make a pick, and I think that invites then articles of impeachment first thing in the new year. So this to me is the reality, because I don't think the Democrats really cared. Like the Democrats were going to do dirt, and I refer to them as the deep staters. The deep staters were going to do dirt to anybody who Trump had put forward as a candidate for Associate Justice on the Supreme Court. And anyone who gets fooled into believing that it was really all about this guy and his bad past in high school is dreaming in Technicolor. So anyway, getting back to the markets, I really believe it, and it's not because rates are higher. Rates should have and could have been higher many years ago, and weren't permitted to go higher. Now it's the way that they've moved north. It's the way, it's the fund has backed up that's got my eyebrows up, and the equity markets. Basically, for the equity markets to collapse, all that has to happen, in my view, Dunnigan, is the plunge protection team just doesn't have to show up to work one day.
Yeah.
Because things that are on very, very, very high perches can fall a very long way in a very short period of time. And my view is, if we are to see something along the lines, or even worse than the stock market collapse in 1987, and if that were to happen in relatively short order, I could very well see Jane and Joe six-pack being extremely antsy about their, let's just say, their financial well-being going forward. And then if they had the complicit media saying that this is a clear, if we had a collapse, if we had the mainstream media chiming that this is a clear sign that the markets have voted against Trump's policies, it could bring a new dynamic to the midterm elections that I don't think many people are really anticipating at all. And some people, even if such an event were to occur, people might just chalk it up to being that the markets were too high. Anyway, I don't believe anything. I don't believe that anything happens by accident. But I would also like to point out, you made the comment about volatility being very, very ratcheted up. Well, you're right. It's been very ratcheted up uncommonly or uncharacteristically for the past 8 years, very ratcheted up in the bond market and very ratcheted up in the equity markets. But what I find quite amazing is that in the last 2 weeks, we've probably seen the tightest range on Bitcoin price that we've seen in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
And you see, to me, that doesn't gel. It's like, in my view, I just look at it on a macro level. To me, it's like Bitcoin prices are being held in check, and the equity markets and the bond markets are. It's like the leash has been taken, or the muzzle has been taken off them, and they're free to do whatever they want. Anyway, that's just the way it looks from a guy in Toronto.
Well, your thesis there sounds like it's that those who are against Trump, whether you consider it the American Democratic Party or whether you consider it the globalists, are, now that he has firmly wrapped himself around in the markets around himself, saying, look at these great markets that I created, and we're heading into the midterm elections. It sounds like in order to foment a changing of the guard in Congress, tell me if I'm getting your thesis right, is that the powers that be are going to let the markets, they're going to remove the hand that's been sustaining the markets and let them crash around Trump's shoulders, and in order to get discontent and hopefully see a change in leadership.
Yeah. Well, that's my thought, Dunnigan, and I do believe that if I'm correct, this is going to happen with blinding speed, and the decline is going to be people will have slack jaws.
Well, you already see news stories coming out today. IMF cuts its global growth forecast, citing trade disruptions on CNBC. So already trade disruptions, we know what that's a code word for is Trump's tariffs. China also on CNN, China pumps more cash into its economy as trade war heats up. Once again, so already the shadows are all being cast at Trump.
The narrative is being concocted that Trump's policies are causing problems, and if we see the Dow Jones go from 26,400 or wherever it is today, and if we see it in 2 weeks at 18,000, which that's the kind of drop that I'm talking. I'm talking about a real smash up in the equity markets. And I can just hear the bleats coming from CNBC and CNN, and that this is an affirmation. The markets have voted. Trump's policies are a failure. His economic policies have damned us to failure. They blame his tariffs. Like the tariffs aren't new. Tariffs, the market went up 8,000 points when he announced his first round of tariffs. But I mean, isn't it funny how the narrative right now, it's like you can almost feel the change in the air, just like, we're transiting in the Northern Hemisphere from summer weather to fall weather. It's a different feel. And I mean, I'm starting to sense it already in the mainstream press. So anyway, we'll see how that develops as time goes along. To be honest with you, Dunnigan, I hope I'm wrong. I don't really want to see the equity markets collapse. And anyway, it's ridiculous where bond yields have been, but allowing them to throttle up in 30 days to ridiculous levels, or to have a move where it could catch a whole lot of people wrong-footed. I don't necessarily view as being a smart move. But then again, if I'm correct, and if it's the globalists that are behind all this, we've talked many times over the past, number of years, how the globalists, the deep staters, how they generally have a disdain for humanity. So if they saw a lot of people in pain, I don't think it would really bother them in the least. I mean, I look at what they're willing to do to Kavanaugh. I could care less whether Kavanaugh or somebody else was the pick for the Supreme Court, but I do believe that the man was generally a good man. The man was subjected to, in the past, 6 different FBI background checks. Was already sitting on a very, very high judicial position in the American justice system, and for all these things coming out on him, and it's the way the leadership of the Democratic Party, which to me is just a deep state party, because they're completely have completely aligned themselves and are affiliated with the deep state. The way they sat on this information and then let it out, like crack the egg 2 days before they were due to vote, is it's unbelievable. Like unless you're dealing with a crazed group of individuals who would go to any length to get rid of Trump, or to defeat Trump, or to impinge on his ability to operate. So anyway, that's what I see. I call it the way I see it. And, I'm neither Republican or Democrat. I'm more of a libertarian bent in my political philosophy. And libertarians, I don't think are necessarily aligned with either the Democrats or the Republicans. But I just look at what I see going on. And I find it hard to believe that in a country that's got the traditions of America with the rule of law, that this kind of behavior is allowed to exhibit itself. So that's my thought on all that.
So you're looking for most in your gut. You're saying you're seeing a major market downturn, both in the equity markets and the debt markets, in the next few weeks. Simon Hines asked, "What's happening in the economy that would make you conclude that we are near a financial crash? And I know you're looking at it from many different angles, but just if you could kind of identify your top three things or something.
I think I just laid out my case, and believe it or not, Dunnigan, as much as I am short-term bearish, like when I talk short-term, I'm talking over the next 45 days.
Okay.
Because I do believe that the powers that be have the ability to correct a deep dive in the bond market, because they have derivatives that they can use to repair that damage very quickly, and force rates back down. And typically that's exactly what the Fed has done, time and time again in its playbook. When a seeming financial crisis happens, the Fed's always there to open the spigot and to push more money into the system, and very visibly. So, I'm talking deep dive and then very, very sharp corrections. If the Democrats retake the House and Senate.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's just where my head's at right now.
This one's an interesting question from a viewer that takes a little bit of pondering. This is Russell Bofalino asks, what would a 35-year-old Rob Kerby do today to prepare for his financial future? And how would you prepare differently given your age? Would you take on more risk if you were 35? If so, what would be those risks? If we all knew this to be as bad as it's talked about, the economy, what would a young Rob Kerby do at 35 that he wouldn't do with investing at his current age?
That is a very good question. And but I mean, if you're talking about my personal experience at being 35, when I was 35, I had a dependent child, and I was just coming off an unsuccessful marriage. So I mean, I was matter of factly sort of limited with my choices of what I could practically do at that time. And to be honest, I probably have more freedom in terms of choice today than I would have had at that period in time. So, it's kind of sort of like asking, what's the right investment for any person at any given time, and this is what investment advisors, a process that they usually take prospective clients through before they start making asset allocation recommendations. You need to understand somebody's position in life, who they're supporting, how many dependents they have, what their lifestyle is, what their risk tolerance is. These are all really important factors. But I mean, if you're asking me, for me directly, I don't think I would do things any differently than I did when I was 35, because, my choices were very limited then. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of one way to answer the question. And somebody who might be single, who doesn't have any kids, who's unattached, might think completely differently and outside the box. They might pack up and move to Australia. I mean, so it's that's a personal thing. And before anyone makes major decisions in their life, I think it's probably a very smart idea to sit down and really take stock of where you are. And instead of thinking about what you want to be doing sort of next month or in the next year, think about where you might want to be in 5 years, or where you might fancy yourself being in 5 years, because I just think building your life around short-term, maybe emotionally charged events and conditions can be very inappropriate if you're guided at all by any long-term thinking or planning. So it's maybe a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but I find it very hard to make a hard and fast decision, because I don't think it's arbitrary. So it's condition dependent, or as the Fed likes to say, everything's data dependent.
I guess maybe that's just one what they're probing. Maybe they're probing for their own interest because they're 35, but maybe they're just thinking really right now in your own situation that you find yourself. If you found yourself exactly as you are now, but at age 35, how would it affect how you look, what your outlook is, and what you think your options would be going forward?
Well, I mean, my view would be to, as much as my income would allow, to be acquiring more physical precious metal, because there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that the significance and the relative value versus paper assets, physical precious metal will shine very brightly again. And it's only a matter of when this happens, in my view, not a matter of if it will happen.
Okay.
And I do believe we're going to see the complete and utter destruction of fiat money, and I think it's quite close at hand.
This one is also a bit of a history down memory lane. Space Monkey asks, what was your red pill moment? A documentary, a friend or family member, or perhaps a happy accident? What was it that led you down this contrarian path?
I used to be a part of the system, and my red pill really was working at a company in Canada called Investors Group as an investment advisor. When I asked a coworker which precious metals fund he used in portfolios, and I mean, Investors Group is the largest supplier of mutual funds in Canada. They have back in the day anyway, in the early 2000s, they had 120 proprietary mutual funds on their product shelf. And my coworkers said to me, well, we don't have a precious metals fund. And I said, well, I didn't believe him. I thought he was joking with me. So I said, well, why don't we have a precious metals fund? And he said, well, management views precious metals as being too risky. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? I said, we have 6 failed internet funds on our product shelf, and but we don't have one precious metals fund. And my coworker responded to me. I said, how can that be? He said, well, gold bugs would say there's a conspiracy against gold, and the minute he uttered the word gold bug, I said, my eyes literally rolled into the back of my head, and I said, oh, come on, you're not one of those, are you? I mean, the first time I had heard the term gold bug was back in 1987. And, the way gold bugs were sort of characterized to me in 1987 was that these are people that belonged in straitjackets.
Yeah.
Padded. So, anyway, having had this encounter, I just said to this chap that worked at the same place I was working, I just said, this is completely and utterly ridiculous that there's conspiracy against gold. And I said, I'm sure I could, spend 20 minutes on the internet and could find credible information to show you just how ridiculous that is. And so anyway, it was that challenge. And I went off and spent maybe an hour. And what I stumbled on was I believe it was the Reg Howe lawsuit against, he was basically suing the Fed, the Bank for International Settlements, 8 banks, Barrick Gold, for rigging the price of gold. And his case was only, his case was the initial landmark, let's just say legal case against the big gold entities. And his case was basically thrown out of court because the judge said, the information you're providing is sound, but you are not a sufficiently aggrieved as a counterparty.
I see.
To have standing in this case.
Okay.
As in, basically, the judge was saying, you haven't lost money, Mr. Howe. Your case, however sound it is, you haven't lost money, so you don't really have a case because you haven't lost money. So his case was basically thrown out on that basis. And then who picked the ball up? And this is what this initial hour's worth of investigation taught me.
Right.
And then on the back of his case being thrown out, the Don Doyle, who was the president of Blanchard Coin in America, he picked up basically where Reg Howe's case left off, and as the biggest coin dealer in America, the Blanchard lawsuit came forward, and they certainly did have standing to make the claim that they and their customers were certainly sufficiently aggrieved to have standing in such a law case. And the interesting thing about the Blanchard lawsuit was that it was settled out of court with a gag order attached to it, in that nobody was allowed to, Blanchard must have been given money, or they wouldn't have settled, and but they weren't allowed to talk about it. And but the interesting thing that occurred very shortly after the Blanchard lawsuit was settled, Barrick Gold basically immunized themselves from their, let's just say their hedge book, where they had sold a lot of gold forward, and they immunized themselves from that. My belief is completely through buying futures. But anyway, that was my red pill moment. And that would have been 2003-ish or thereabouts.
That's fascinating. We've got several questions, longer and shorter, so I'll pick the shorter one of the same vein. Eddie Jones asks, if gold prices increase in multiples from its present value, what actions will the government put in place to limit profits from being fully realized besides taxes?
Well, the American government has a tradition, or has a history, that they have confiscated gold. I can't see them doing that again, but what I can see them doing, you hit the nail on the head with the taxes. I could see them applying special windfall taxes to anybody who benefits from having gold mining shares in their portfolios. Anybody who has paper gold investments, if they happen to go up in value, they'll put a special surtax, maybe a windfall tax on. And the other thing people ought to know, in most jurisdictions in the world, companies that mine gold don't physically own the gold itself. They are granted licenses to work the deposit, just as you are given a license to drive a car on a road. And if you don't conform to the rules, and rules can be changed or new rules can be invented at any time, and if you're not following the rules to the letter, your license can be taken away from you. So any gold mining company that would be found not performing up to government standards, their asset, their license to work that deposit could be taken away, and could be put in either in the hands of the government, mm-hmm. or an entity more friendly to the government. So my long-standing view on owning paper representations of gold has not always necessarily been that they would not go up in value if the price of gold were to rocket higher.
Mm-hmm.
It's just who that increased value would ever accrue to. That I always had questions about, which is why I'm a bigger advocate of holding your gold in your own possession.
That's interesting. And a lot of people have expressed that same sentiment: is unless you hold it, you don't own it. And there's the whole push towards a cashless society, et cetera, is all about taking things out of your control, and putting the options into those who are controlling the system rather than in the individual's hands.
Yep.
This is an interesting one, and I didn't realize it till I had to dig out a Silver Eagle to even ask the question. Abolish Federal Reserve asks, why does the silver or gold ego not have a purity stamp on their coins, but the Royal Canadian and others do? And I pulled out a U.S. Silver Eagle. On the front, there's just the Walking Liberty, and on the back, on the reverse, it does say 1 ounce fine silver, but it doesn't. But it doesn't define fine.
Well, I think fine silver is I believe it has to be a minimum of 3/9 pure to be fine silver. So you're basically talking pure silver.
Another one is from Mimi says, do you think that even Canada is at risk of hyperinflation, and do you recommend the Canadians buy precious metals?
Absolutely. Sure. I mean, our currency is a derivative of your dollar. I mean, when people quote the Canadian dollar, they quote it as, a mathematical fraction of the U.S. dollar. And that's all fiat currencies are expressed the same way. So, I mean, all fiat, when fiat money dies, I shouldn't say when fiat money. Some fiat currencies have already died. I mean, for all intent and purpose, the Venezuelan currency died. Currency in Greece and Cyprus has pretty much died. I believe that Italy has severe monetary challenges right now, and their currency is not doing well. Currencies in South America, whether it's Argentina or Brazil, their currencies have literally been destroyed. I know the Iranian currency has been absolutely decimated, and isn't it interesting that when a body, whether it's a political body or whether it's a social organization, or whether it's the human body, when the body comes under catastrophic health issues, what ends up happening in the human body is the blood will be brought back to protect basically the vital organs, the heart, the stuff in your chest cavity, at the expense of the extremities, and having had a first-hand account with somebody who succumbed to a very, very bad diabetic condition. My mother, years ago, she lost her feet, and for her it was her legs. No blood circulation, gangrene, and basically brings on death. But it's the extremities that get it first. And I would like to suggest to people, if you want to pay attention, the Roman Empire, when it fell, it was the extremities of the Roman Empire. It was the outer reaches where the currency, because back then they did a thing called coin clipping, where money was debased by clipping the edges of the coin, and because back then they used specie as currency, as in gold and silver, and you might start off with a coin in Rome, a silver coin the size of a silver eagle, but when the silver eagle made it out to Great Britain, which would have been the far extremity of the Roman Empire, your Silver Eagle, instead of being the size of a Silver Eagle today, might be the size of a dime or a quarter. And that's because the clipping that occurred, the debasement of the currency that occurred along the way, basically meant that people at the extremity of the empire wouldn't take the currency in payment for labor or for goods. So, we can kind of sort of look at Venezuela, Iran, some of these far-flung places as the extremities of the fiat-centric world. And, the money's dying there. And it's fiat, they have fiat money too, and their fiats are dying. And of course, America is still relatively unscathed in terms of the dollar still appears to be strong to many, but many other fiats are dying. So anyway, I don't know if that's any kind of an explanation, but that's kind of where my head's at.
Yeah, clearly you emphatically answered that. Yeah, Canadians should consider themselves in the same boat as everyone else, and as far as the fine Silver Eagle goes. But then after that, talking about and
listen, Canada, listen, and this is another thing that's very unique to Canada. Canada historically has had a balance of trade surplus with America, but that all changed back around, basically in the last financial crisis in the mid-2000s. And a lot of Canada's issues, or a very severe issue that Canada faces, is in Canada we have a national energy policy, and the roots of our national energy policy were developed by the Liberal government, federal Liberal government, back in the 1980s. Canada as a country produces enough crude oil to be 100% self-sufficient plus. So we are a natural exporter of crude oil. But what the government put us on a track for back in the 80s is that we were an exporter. They made us an exporter of oil and an importer of oil at the same time.
Oh, right. You've addressed this in our last talk about the disparity in price value there. Yep.
So to give you an idea where these benchmarks are today, because it's worth noting, Canada exports roughly 1.5 million barrels a day to America, and the benchmark that oil gets sold at is a benchmark referred to as Western Canadian Select, WCS, and it's quoted or it trades at a discount to West Texas Intermediate oil, and it gets this moniker because of its origin, and its origin is tar sand. Right. But the oil has to be sweetened. Really, really, really heavy oil does not flow well through pipelines. So the oil goes through a process where it's sweetened, and it's synthetic oil, which technically is a very high grade sweet oil, but it trades at a huge discount because it's got this dirty label. And to give you an idea where Western Canadian Select is trading at today, $28 a barrel. And we've got West Texas Intermediate that trades today at $74 and change. And then what's even worse is Canada imports 1 million barrels a day from the Middle East at the Brent crude reference price, and that today is at $84. So Canada has a policy where we import 1 million barrels at $84 a barrel, and we at the same time are exporting 1.5 million barrels at $28 a barrel. Do the math.
Yeah. And that's right.
Ask the question whether Canadians should be concerned about the state of our sovereign finances.
Good point. And this may be related to the next question from Jeff Harbaugh, who asks, do you have mitigation strategies for peak oil?
Peak oil.
Yeah, the idea
We had,
that the world is past the peak output and extraction potential for oil for some years now, and it's going to be continuing to decline going forward.
okay, well, I was told we had peak oil in the 70s. I actually took a course in university, first year university. For me, that was 1979. And I took a course that we had peak oil then. And I was told that it was all going to be gone before the end of the 80s. And not gone, not yet. And it just seems, I mean, look what's happened since the 70s. In the 70s, we were told, mid-late 70s, we were told peak oil. There was, we were going to run out.
Mm-hmm.
America was a terminal in a terminal position where they were going to import. Well, America's now exporting oil. So anyway, this whole discussion about peak oil, I'm not saying it can't become an issue, but you know what? I need to see some hard evidence that it's happening or it's about to happen before I'm going to sign up and swallow that fluff. To me, it's fluff for now.
It reminds me of other times when the economics change or the technology changes around any raw material extraction or any synthesization of any material, and when the business case is there, usually there's an opportunity to find alternate sources or alternate technologies and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think there's a stronger case done again for peak gold than there is for peak oil right now. I mean, the gold that's being produced today is coming from much lower grade ores than 20 or 30 years ago, and that's a fact. You see, that's actually documentable. But the data that we were given 30 years ago that we were going to be out of oil in 10 years has proven to be false. But in the case of precious metal, every year it seems that mining companies are mining lower and lower and lower grade ore deposits, and that in itself is the reason why the price of precious metal has to increase, because the cost to mine it continually goes up because you're mining lower grades of ore. 30 years ago, a high-grade gold mine might have been 10 or 12 grams a ton of material moved. Now, high grade is considered probably 3 or 4 grams per ton of material moved, and lots of mines are operating at 1.5, 2, and they supposedly make it up on volumes. But I mean, anyway, the price of gold has to continually go higher as lower grade ore continues to be mined. And for all that we've heard about the world's going to run out of oil, we haven't. Plain and simple, we just haven't.
If we could turn the attention to a different resource, and that's or a different asset, and that's real estate. Deruz Smutzik asks, do you foresee a dramatic repricing of real estate values in Federal Reserve notes as gold becomes the primary currency?
Yeah, I do, because I do believe we're going to experience at some point in time a very, very stiff hyperinflation, and hyperinflations cause powers that be to do unusual things. And the example that I'm going to cite here is what occurred in Weimar Germany, when the currency really, really gained speed in its destruction in the hyperinflation. What ended up happening is that the mortgages, because, people might think naturally that hyperinflation would be great because you'd end up paying your mortgage off in devalued dollars at a point in the future.
Right.
And but what the Germans did do is they indexed mortgages to the price of gold. And so as a result, your mortgage was basically recalibrated. So, like the people, it's like bankers and governments have a way of resetting rules when they're about to lose. They always seem to be able to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. And when you have the ability to write laws and make laws, usually you're not going to come out on the losing end.
We've got another set of questions that all fall together, and I think this is maybe the shortest one of all of them, that in that same vein, and that is, would 500 ounces of silver make any real difference for a regular laborer when we reach the time of transition?
Well, I would. I'm a person who actually believes in mathematical principles, and if anyone knows the expression "a reversion to a mean," if you want to go back to Roman times, which spanned quite a period of time, hundreds of years. A solid upper middle class wage was 40 to 50 ounces of silver a year. So that's what a Roman imperial soldier would have earned. Which I would imagine that would be a job that would be probably equivalent to a very well paid teacher. It's a government job, yes, but a very well paid or decently paid solid middle class, upper middle class wage, 40 to 50 ounces of silver in a year. And boy, if we ever revert to that mean, you tell me what the price of an ounce of silver will be. That is an historic mean. As recently as the year 1900, I believe it was. I think it was maybe a dime, roughly a dime, which would have been, a third of an ounce of silver was a good wage for a day. And I think it actually might have been a fraction of a dime that was actually a good wage for a day. So, so to answer the question, I think 500 ounces of physical silver that's put away after a reset has been completed, I think 500 ounces of silver could have a very, very material impact in somebody's life. Absolutely, I do believe that.
Just to add a little color to the previous, when we were talking about hyperinflation like in Venezuela and so on, it was interesting because an article came out today on, this is Bloomberg saying that Venezuela's annual inflation rate will surge to 1.3 million% by the end of this year and 10 million% next year. And I looked back, the article about the price of gold in Venezuela right now, this is back from August, so we're looking back 2 months, August 6th, almost exactly 2 months ago, and that said 1 million% by the end of the year, and now it's up to 1.37 million% 2 months later, the estimate. So even the estimates are hyperinflating. But in that same article from August, it said that a 1 ounce gold coin at the beginning of the year would have gone up to July 30th, gone for 211 million bolivars, which is an increase of 3.1 million% from just the beginning of the year. So even in a hyperinflationary economy where the fiat is supposedly inflating at approximately 1 million% a year, gold went up by 3.1 million% in the same time period.
Yeah, well, you know what? The other thing that's interesting to point out to people, Dunnigan, 30 years ago, Venezuela had one of the highest standards of living in the world. I mean, they were a very, very progressive country, but they chose a path of socialism, which is, in my view, it's an identical path to what the Democrats are trying to take America down. And I find it absolutely amazing that people I speak with, and there are an awful lot of people I speak with don't believe that hyperinflation could happen in Canada or the US, can't happen to us. Well, I'm sure 35 years ago there were people that never believed that a hyperinflation could occur in a country like Venezuela. And, but lo and behold, these things can happen, and they can happen very quickly when people lose faith in the currency. And, faith in a currency can be lost very quickly, just like faith in human relationships can be lost very quickly. It's like, if you want to just think about it metaphorically, if you come home one day and you find your spouse in bed with somebody else, faith or trust in the relationship can be destroyed and can be vaporized in one shot. And, in a monetary sense, do we have such possibilities where the faith in the money could combust very quickly? I would hazard to guess yes. We already have very credible reporting that an extra $21 trillion off book was created, and we don't know what's become of it. And, this whole matter has now been swept under a huge rug with the powers that be basically saying it's a matter of national interest. So we're never going to be given a proper accounting as to what really happened to the 21 trillion that was created, as documented by Dr. Skidmore and Catherine Austin Fitts. These incidents keep cropping up, and when people aren't given credible answers as to what happened, where the money went, who has the money, could this relationship of trust in money, could it combust very quickly? I would say yes, it could, especially with the amount of dollars that are held offshore by foreigners.
Yeah, when you mentioned emerging economies that have tried socialism and that sort of thing, we just returned from a trip that included Italy and Greece and talked to several people there. We'll be producing a podcast about the economic conversations that we had with common people there and the faith that they've lost in their government, the faith that they've lost in their banking system, and it's just a few steps from that. Ironically, though, some of the people feel like that the solution to some of these overly committed socialist policies that led through these decades is more of the same. It's typical with human nature. We often think that the cure is more of the same. So
sure, yeah. Well, since the financial crisis that was brought on by too much debt, we've added a lot more debt, because the only way you can cure a problem with too much debt is to add a lot more.
Well, we're going to have to get you back on our schedule for shortly after the midterm elections, hoping the world holds together long enough to get us that far, and see how this place played out. It's quite illuminating to hear your bearish sentiment in the short term, and we'll stay. I know that our viewers are closely concerned and closely interested in that, and they'll be watching things closely. But I really always appreciate your sage advice here and your perspective. And always, can you tell people where they can find more of your thoughts, and if they'd like to establish any kind of more learning from you?
Well, you can catch me on the web at kirbyanalytics.com. A lot of information there.
We've been speaking with Rob Kirby, proprietary analyst and founder of kirbyanalytics.com. Rob, thank you as always for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers.
My pleasure.